No one expected what came out of Obama's mouth that night. And 42 seconds later, the entire world saw Trump like they had never seen him before. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It wasn't the kind of insult Trump thrives on exchanging. It was worse. Because when Obama spoke, it was deliberate, calm, and sharpened to a single devastating truth. The cameras caught everything, the fluorescent lights bouncing off the polished desk, the hush in the room as Obama leaned ever so slightly forward. His voice didn't rise. It dropped, pulling everyone in closer. Some people inherit businesses, he said, eyes fixed on Trump and then, deliberately, on Ivanka. But dignity, integrity, those can't be passed down. You have to earn them. Gasps rippled through the audience, faint at first, then swelling like a wave breaking against the stage. Trump's face tightened, his lips pulling into that familiar scowl. Ivanka, seated nearby, forced a thin smile, the kind meant to disguise discomfort but failing under the glare of 100 lenses. The silence after Obama's line was heavy, thicker than the air in the studio. Every second ticked like thunder. For a man who had once commanded the presidency with bombast and bravado, Trump suddenly looked cornered, trapped inside the weight of a truth he could not mock away. 42 seconds. That was all it took. Not a grand speech, not a filibuster of statistics, not a storm of insults. Just one surgical strike, delivered with the calm precision of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And as those seconds unraveled, Trump's composure began to fray. His fingers tapped, his jaw clenched. His eyes darted as if searching for a lifeline in a room that refused to give him one. The crowd sat frozen, waiting, knowing something was about to snap. Obama stayed still, composed, as if daring Trump to respond. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was the louder sound, and then, like a kettle finally reaching its boil, Trump erupted. The eruption wasn't measured, it wasn't controlled, and it certainly wasn't presidential. It was raw, unhinged. A volcanic burst of anger the world would replay again and again. But before the chaos engulfed the night, the question still hung in the air. Why had Obama chosen this moment, this line, this truth? The answer would send shockwaves far beyond that stage. Why did this moment matter so much? Why did one calm sentence cut deeper than years of headlines and years of scandals? Because America wasn't just watching two men spar on a stage. It was watching two visions of the nation collide. One rooted in dignity, patience, and truth, and the other in arrogance, entitlement, and an unrelenting hunger for control. The country had been on edge long before this night. Families at kitchen tables whispered about democracy fraying. Immigrants who had crossed oceans for a shot at belonging wondered if their sacrifices still held meaning. Young people scrolled through feeds where lies outran the truth by miles, wondering if their voices mattered at all. It wasn't just politics. It was identity. It was legacy. It was the future of what America claimed to be. And there, under the glare of the cameras, those anxieties crystallized into human form. On one side, Barack Obama, calm, deliberate, the steady hand who chose his words like arrows aimed at the heart of hypocrisy. On the other side, Donald Trump and his daughter Ivanka, the dynasty of entitlement, wealth without accountability, power without humility. They weren't just defending their name, they were shielding a legacy built on bluster, branding, and the illusion of invincibility. That's what made the silence after Obama's remark so powerful. It wasn't only Trump's dignity on trial, it was the question of whether America still rewarded truth over noise, whether integrity could still pierce the shield of arrogance. The moment stretched beyond the studio walls, reaching living rooms, phone screens, classrooms, and union halls. People didn't just hear Obama's words, they felt them. They felt them in the way their stomachs tightened, in the way they turned to one another and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Trump's dynasty had always thrived on spectacle, on shouting down, interrupting, mocking until the other side broke. But this time the opposite happened. Trump looked rattled. Ivanka looked cornered. The audience looked hungry, almost desperate for someone to hold power accountable without sinking into its ugliness. And in that hunger, the stakes grew higher, because this wasn't just a battle between two political figures. It was a question of inheritance. What kind of America were we handing down? Was it the America of dynasties who believed power was a family heirloom? Or was it the America of earned respect, where dignity was the true currency of leadership? Every second that ticked after Obama's words reminded people of that choice. And every twitch of Trump's face, every forced smile from Ivanka, every bead of sweat under those glaring lights made it clear the old game of smoke and mirrors was collapsing. And yet, this was only the beginning. What happened next didn't just shake the room. It didn't just rattle Trump or humble Ivanka. It ignited something far bigger, a firestorm that swept across social media, cable news, and the quiet conversations of everyday people. Because 42 seconds wasn't just the countdown to Trump's eruption, it was the countdown to a national reckoning. And that reckoning was about to explode beyond the stage. To understand why Obama's words landed with such force, you have to look at the dynasty he was aiming at. The Trump name was never just a family, it was a brand. A fortress of image carefully built on gold-plated facades and larger-than-life claims. For decades, Donald Trump cultivated himself as the ultimate showman, the man who could bend reality to his will with a smirk, a tweet, or a staged photo op. His empire thrived on bluster, on the idea that if you shouted loud enough and long enough, truth would eventually bow down, and standing beside him, often smiling softly as though untouched by the storm, was Ivanka. To many, she was the polished, carefully managed face of the Trump dynasty. Where her father was brash and erratic, she was marketed as refined, composed, almost untouchable. But behind the gloss, Ivanka played her part in fortifying the same empire, deflecting criticism, lending it a sheen of civility, ensuring the family business of politics and profit kept running smoothly. The contradictions in their public image were glaring. Trump branded himself as a self-made genius, yet his fortune was built on inherited wealth, bailouts, and favorable loopholes. Ivanka portrayed herself as an advocate for women and working families, yet stood silently, or worse, approvingly, beside policies and rhetoric that stripped dignity from those very groups. Together, they embodied a dynasty that demanded loyalty but offered little accountability. Control was their obsession. For Trump, control meant silencing anyone who dared question him, whether through insults, lawsuits, or the sheer volume of his voice. For Ivanka, control meant image management, smiling through scandals, pivoting conversations, projecting poise even as the family's foundation cracked beneath her heels. They believed that if they controlled the narrative, they controlled the truth. But America saw the cracks. People remembered the bankruptcies, the broken promises, the cruelty wrapped in jokes. They remembered how Ivanka used her platform to defend her father's harshest moments with a polished smile, her calm demeanor serving as a shield for his chaos. The dynasty thrived on spectacle, yes, but also on denial. As long as they denied the reality long enough, they assumed the public would move on. This is why Obama's calmness was so dangerous for them. He didn't shout. He didn't descend into the mud. He didn't need to. By simply existing as their opposite, steady where they were erratic, dignified where they were shameless, he exposed the hollowness of their act. It wasn't just a political clash. It was a mirror held up to a dynasty terrified of what it would reveal. Ivanka, in particular, represented the dynasty's attempt at legitimacy. To the outside world, she was the bridge, the polished proof that the Trumps weren't just chaos, that they could be serious, credible, respectable. But when Obama turned his words toward her, however subtly, the illusion wavered. The dynasty's greatest strength, its ability to project invincibility, suddenly looked fragile, vulnerable, human. And that's the story they never wanted told. Because once people saw the cracks, they couldn't unsee them. Once they saw that the golden image was just painted plaster, the spell began to break. Trump, for all his bluster, had always relied on control of the room. He relied on his voice being the loudest, his insults landing hardest, his presence suffocating opponents. But against Obama's calm, that power withered. And Ivanka's smiles, once so carefully timed, began to look like defenses against truths she couldn't rebut. This wasn't just about politics. It was about legacy. Whether arrogance could masquerade as leadership forever, whether a dynasty built on spectacle could withstand the weight of truth. For years, the Trumps believed they had mastered the game. They controlled the headlines, manipulated the storylines, and bent reality until it suited their needs. But in that studio, under those lights, reality was no longer theirs to bend. The truth had a voice, and it was speaking with quiet precision, and the dynasty built on bluster, not truth, felt the ground shift beneath them. But little did they know, the calmest man in the room was about to light the fuse that would unravel everything. To understand why Obama's words carried such undeniable weight that night, you have to look back, far before the lights, the cameras, and the crowds, to the journey that shaped him. Unlike the dynasty seated across from him, Obama did not inherit a gilded tower or a family name synonymous with wealth. He inherited something more complex, a patchwork identity stitched together from struggle, displacement, and the endless search for belonging. Born to a Kenyan father and a white American mother, Obama's childhood was marked not by excess but by questions. Questions about who he was, where he fit, and what it meant to claim a place in a world eager to define him before he could define himself. In classrooms, he was the outsider. On playgrounds, he was reminded of the difference written across his skin. The privilege of certainty, the kind that Ivanka Trump wore like a tailored dress, was something Obama never knew. What he did know was how to adapt, how to listen, and how to carry himself with dignity even when dignity was denied to him. That resilience became his compass. From Hawaii to Indonesia, from Harvard's echoing halls to Chicago's South Side, Obama learned that leadership wasn't about commanding fear. It was about earning trust. He sat in church basements with families whose factories had closed, walked through neighborhoods where hope had been traded for boarded windows, and he listened. He didn't just hear people's stories. He absorbed them, carried them, and later reflected them back in speeches that felt less like performance and more like collective testimony. It was this grounding that set him apart from men like Trump. Where Trump built an image on exaggeration, Obama built his life on navigating contradictions with grace. Where Ivanka wore polished smiles to mask uncomfortable truths, Obama wore his humanity openly, his flaws, his hesitations, his search for meaning. He wasn't perfect, but he was real, and realness was its own form of power. By the time he ascended to the presidency, Obama embodied the very things his opponents feared most: credibility rooted in lived experience, authority born from struggle, and a calm that could not be rattled by insult or spectacle. Even his critics admitted it. Obama had a presence. He didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. The quiet weight of his words was enough. That presence became the defining contrast on the night he faced Trump and Ivanka. The dynasty was built on constant noise, on the idea that dominance came from drowning out opponents. But Obama, he knew the power of silence, the way a pause could sharpen a point, the way restraint could cut deeper than rage. And so, when the stage was set, Obama didn't need to prepare a circus. He didn't need the chants, the oversized slogans, the choreographed applause. His weapon was something the Trumps could never purchase or manufacture: credibility. Every line he spoke carried the gravity of a man who had lived what he preached, who had faced skepticism, racism, and doubt, and yet carried himself without surrendering to bitterness. In the days leading up to the confrontation, analysts speculated how he would handle Trump's inevitable barrage. Would he match insult with insult? Would he sidestep, deflect, avoid? What few realized was that Obama didn't need to play Trump's game. He had already won by refusing to enter it. He wasn't there to shout louder. He was there to embody something entirely different: dignity in the face of arrogance, truth in the face of spectacle. That's why the moment mattered. Obama was not simply another politician delivering another line. He was the living embodiment of what many Americans still wanted to believe was possible: that leadership could be grounded in service rather than self, in truth rather than branding, in dignity rather than dynasty. As Trump shifted in his seat, waiting for the fight he thought he could dominate, Obama waited too. But his waiting wasn't desperation. It was patience. The kind of patience born from years of carrying burdens heavier than hecklers and insults. The patience of a man who had endured louder storms and still chosen calm. When he finally leaned forward, when his voice dipped and the cameras tightened, The contrast could not have been sharper. Across from him sat Trump, bracing himself with bluster, and Ivanka steadying the family image with polished stillness. And there sat Obama, calm, composed, carrying with him the weight of a lifetime's worth of struggle turned into strength. And when Obama finally chose to speak, he didn't need a rally. Just 42 seconds. The moment the debate began to tilt toward confrontation, the air in the studio thickened. Trump leaned forward in his chair, lips curling into that familiar smirk that signaled he was ready to dominate the stage by sheer volume. His hand shot up, chopping through the moderator's words, as he bulldozed into the conversation. Wrong, that's not true. Everyone knows it, he barked, his voice booming, desperate to seize control. Ivanka sat just behind him, nodding along with a look of polished assurance, her smile carefully rehearsed. Every nod was its own form of punctuation, a silent signal to the cameras. Yes, this is strength. Yes, this is control. To their supporters, it was the dynasty in action, father and daughter moving in lockstep, exuding confidence. But to anyone else, it was arrogance on parade, a performance meant to mask the trembling foundation beneath. Obama, however, did not flinch. He stayed exactly where he was, posture steady, hands folded, eyes locked in. The cameras caught the contrast, Trump's jittery bluster against Obama's calm silence. The louder Trump spoke, the more commanding Obama's quiet became. The audience could feel it too. There's a kind of electricity that runs through a room when tension reaches its peak, a drum roll of anticipation that doesn't need instruments to be heard. People leaned forward in their seats, phones half raised to capture what they sensed was coming. Each interruption, each mocking laugh from Trump only amplified the anticipation. At one point, Trump jabbed a finger across the stage. You had your chance, Barack. You failed this country. You failed the economy, and you failed the people. His voice cracked as he pressed the words harder than his breath could support. The scowl on his face was broadcast to millions. But behind it lingered something else, the panic of a man who could feel control slipping through his fingers. Ivanka kept nodding, her polished smile straining under the weight of the moment. It was the smile of someone trained to hold composure. But the eyes told a different story, narrow, tense. Caught in the storm her father had summoned but couldn't tame. Through it all, Obama didn't rise to the bait. He didn't trade insult for insult. He let the storm rage, let the noise fill the room until it drowned itself. The patience on his face wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Each pause, each measured breath was a countdown, a reminder that composure itself can be the sharpest blade. The moderator tried to regain control, but even he looked caught in the current. Everyone knew this wasn't a standard debate anymore. It was a battle of personas, truth against spectacle, dignity against noise. And as the minutes dragged forward, the imbalance became visible. Trump was speaking faster, louder, as though speed itself could rescue him. Obama remained immovable, letting the weight of silence do the work. The crowd's anticipation built higher and higher. Some leaned back, stunned at the unfolding drama. Others whispered, "When is he going to answer? When is he going to strike?" It felt less like a debate and more like a boxing match, the audience watching the fighter in the corner who hadn't thrown a punch yet, but everyone knew he could. And then, the pause came. Trump finished another tirade, his voice echoing awkwardly into the silence he hadn't meant to create. For the first time, he stopped talking, chest heaving, eyes darting for confirmation from Ivanka, from the audience, from anyone. Obama leaned forward just slightly. His eyes met Trump's, calm and steady, unblinking. He didn't need a grin, didn't need a sneer. The silence that followed spoke louder than any applause. The room froze, the air suspended like glass about to shatter. Then, with just one sentence, Obama tilted the entire stage. The studio fell into an unnatural quiet, as though the entire air supply had been siphoned out of the room. For nearly an hour, Donald Trump had filled the debate stage with noise, interruptions, jabs, boasts, the familiar storm of sound designed to overwhelm. And then suddenly it stopped. Trump's last tirade ended in a sputter, and all eyes shifted to the man who had barely spoken. Barack Obama leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting lightly on the table, fingertips pressed together. His voice, when it finally came, was measured and calm, almost too calm. "You know, Donald," he began, letting the words hang, "the funny thing about truth is, it doesn't need to shout." The crowd shifted, caught off guard by the stillness of it, the deliberate pacing. Trump's jaw clenched, his mouth opening as if to cut in, but for the first time all evening he hesitated. Something in Obama's tone carried weight, the kind of authority that doesn't need volume to command attention. Obama let the silence stretch. His eyes flicked across the audience, then back to Trump. "You've told America over and over that you built your empire on genius, on brilliance, on being the smartest guy in the room. You've said it so many times that maybe you even started to believe it yourself." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Trump shifted in his seat, tugging at his cuff, his face tightening. Ivanka, perched just behind him, still tried to hold the practiced smile, but her lips twitched as if she were fighting gravity itself. Obama continued, voice steady, not an ounce of strain. "But here's the thing. When you were bragging about your IQ, when you were demanding everyone call you a stable genius, there was something you never expected would come to light." The room stilled again. Every phone in the audience seemed to rise an inch higher. 1,000 digital eyes trained on him, waiting. The moderators, for once, sat frozen, unwilling to break the spell. Obama reached into the folder before him. He didn't lift it yet, just laid his hand on the paper as if to remind the room that it existed. "See, I believe in records, documents, proof, not just bluster. And what I've got here is something very simple. A test. An IQ test taken by you, Donald, decades ago." Gasps swept the crowd. A few audience members audibly whispered, "No way." Trump jolted upright, color flooding into his cheeks. "That's fake. Total fake news," he barked, waving a hand dismissively. But the volume didn't land this time. It only revealed his nerves. Obama didn't flinch. He kept his gaze steady, almost sympathetic. "I don't need to embellish it. I don't need to twist it. The numbers are right here, and they tell a story that no amount of shouting can erase." The suspense became unbearable. The audience leaned forward as one organism, breaths held, hearts pounding. The cameras zoomed closer, Obama's calm expression framed against Trump's flushed fury. Finally, Obama lifted the page. His eyes scanned it, then returned to Trump, and in a voice that carried the weight of finality, he said, "Donald Trump, in 1970, your official IQ score was measured at 116. Above average, sure, but not genius. Not extraordinary. Not even close to what you've built your entire persona around." The silence was thunderous. For half a second, no one moved. Then came the audible gasp, a wave rolling through the studio like a shock wave. Some covered their mouths. Others exchanged wide-eyed stares. Phones shook as audience members struggled to keep recording. Ivanka's smile faltered. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold her composure. But her eyes darted toward her father, searching for reassurance that wasn't there. Her hand, resting on her lap, curled into a fist. Trump, however, unraveled in real time. His hands clenched the desk, knuckles white. His lips parted, then snapped shut. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Caught by the merciless glow of the stage lights, Obama leaned back, letting the words settle, giving the revelation room to echo. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply let the truth exist, naked and undeniable. The pause stretched. The audience was suspended between awe and disbelief, waiting for the inevitable explosion. And then it happened. Trump slammed his fist onto the table, making the microphones rattle. "Lies!" he roared. "Total lies! That's not my score. That's made up by the deep state, by the Obamas, by the—" He tripped over his words, grasping for enemies, for conspiracies, for anything that would explain away the paper in Obama's hand. The eruption was volcanic, uncontainable. He jabbed a finger toward Obama, veins pulsing in his neck. "You think you can humiliate me on live television? You think you can just read some fake document and get away with it?" His voice cracked, his volume peaked. The contrast was stark. Obama's calm poise against Trump's unraveling fury. Every camera caught it. Every microphone captured the tremor in Trump's rage. In the audience, reactions fractured like glass. Some gasped in horror, some laughed in disbelief. A few clapped tentatively, then more followed, until a ripple of applause grew from one side of the room. Others simply sat frozen, phones steady, knowing this was history. This was the moment the debate would be remembered for. Obama didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He simply let Trump rage, let him burn through his fury, his shouting bouncing off the walls, each word more desperate than the last. Ivanka leaned forward, whispering frantically into her father's ear, trying to calm him, but her own composure was cracking. The smile was gone, replaced with tight lips and furrowed brows. Her polished aura dissolved under the heat of the moment. 42 seconds. That's all it took. From the first word of Obama's revelation to Trump's explosion, less than a minute had passed. But in that sliver of time, the stage had tilted. The dynasty built on bluster had been pierced by a simple document, a single truth. The crowd, still buzzing, erupted in applause that drowned out Trump's final shouts. Some stood clapping, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others simply sat stunned, whispering, "Did that really just happen?" Obama remained steady, hands folded once again, the page resting quietly on the table. His face betrayed nothing but quiet resolve. He had spoken less than a minute, yet the weight of those 42 seconds would ripple far beyond the studio, into headlines, into history, into the legacy of everyone in that room. And Trump, red-faced, shouting, raveling, was left flailing against silence that no amount of noise could break. The explosion on stage hadn't even finished reverberating before the internet caught fire. Within minutes, Twitter feeds, Instagram stories, and TikTok reels were ablaze with one phrase: "You're Obama 42 seconds." The hashtag spread like a lightning strike across the globe. Clips of the moment, cut down to that single piercing revelation and Trump's meltdown, ricocheted through every feed. Some looped the silence before the eruption, freezing on Obama's calm expression. Others highlighted Trump's crimson face, sweat glistening, shouting into a void he no longer controlled. Memes arrived instantly, as though the world had been waiting for this very scene. One showed Obama with a chessboard captioned, "Checkmate in 42 seconds." Another zoomed in on Ivanka's dissolving smile, side by side with the Titanic sinking. TikTok creators slowed the footage, adding dramatic soundtracks. Beethoven's Ode to Joy, the bass drop from EDM anthems, even the iconic countdown clock. Late-night shows feasted on it. Monologues practically wrote themselves. Stephen Colbert leaned into the clip with a grin. 42 seconds. That's shorter than Trump's attention span, and it still broke him. Trevor Noah replayed the eruption frame by frame, pausing to mimic Ivanka's uncomfortable glance. Jimmy Fallon had a skit with a timer ticking down until an actor playing Trump flipped a desk. The audience laughed, roared, and cheered. But behind the humor lay the recognition of a real political wound. Global headlines carried the story as if it were an earthquake. The Guardian: Obama's 42-second truth bomb shatters Trump's genius myth. Le Monde: 42 secondes qui ont secoué l'Amérique. Der Spiegel: Die Wahrheit in 43 Sekunden. Even newspapers in far corners of the world replayed the footage, marveling at how a single sentence had ignited a firestorm across borders. Commentators scrambled to frame the event. Some called it the moment Trump lost control. Others labeled it the unraveling of the dynasty. On CNN, analysts replayed the split-screen footage. Obama calm, Trump combusting over and over, dissecting body language, tone, pacing. MSNBC framed it as a study in leadership. Restraint versus rage, dignity versus bluster. Even Fox News struggled to contain the narrative. While loyal voices defended Trump, the images told a different story. Public reactions poured in with raw clarity. Admirers lauded Obama's restraint, marveling at how he needed less than a minute to accomplish what opponents had failed to do for years. "He didn't raise his voice," one viral tweet read. "He raised the truth," another wrote, 42 seconds. That's all it takes when the truth is real. Embarrassment clung to Trump like a shadow he couldn't shake. Even some former allies winced. Behind closed doors, donors whispered about the optics, about how the dynasty that prided itself on control had been exposed as fragile, erratic, unable to withstand a single piece of paper. For Ivanka, the moment replayed endlessly in GIFs and screenshots, her practiced poise cracking, her eyes darting, her smile failing. The world didn't just laugh, it reeled. The memes and late-night punchlines gave people relief, but beneath the laughter was something sharper. For immigrants who had felt Trump's scorn, for communities who had endured his mockery, there was validation. They saw a man who had tried to belittle them finally dwarfed by his own arrogance. For progressives, it was proof that patience, truth, and dignity still had power in a world addicted to spectacle. And yet, as the dust settled, a deeper question began to form. Beyond the hashtags and the headlines, what did those 42 seconds really mean? Was it just a viral moment, destined to fade into the churn of news cycles? Or was it something larger, something that pierced the mythology of power and arrogance in a way that could not be undone? The laughter was loud, the memes relentless, the applause echoing. But underneath the noise, something deeper stirred, something that couldn't be summed up in a punchline or a trending tag. Because in the end, this wasn't just about humiliation. It was about truth finally cutting through the smog. And that truth was only beginning to unfold. But beyond the laughter and the memes, something deeper was happening. When the storm of headlines and hashtags began to quiet, what lingered wasn't the volume of Trump's voice or the rehearsed nods of Ivanka. What lingered was the stillness, the image of Obama sitting calm and steady, refusing to be dragged into the mud. That image became a mirror for the nation, reflecting a truth many had almost forgotten. Dignity will always outlast arrogance. Obama didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to bask in the aftermath of Trump's outburst. His words, those 42 seconds of clarity, stood taller than any rally, taller than any insult. They reminded America that service is not measured in headlines or ratings, but in the quiet persistence of truth. For every family who had felt belittled, for every immigrant who had been told they didn't belong, for every young person who wondered if integrity still mattered in politics, this was proof. Proof that bluster is temporary. Proof that entitlement eventually crumbles. Proof that truth endures. As commentators and citizens replayed the moment, a pattern emerged. The moral wasn't complicated. It was universal. Leaders who build themselves on ego eventually collapse under their own weight. Leaders who stand on service, humility, and truth may not always command the loudest room, but they command history. Obama himself once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." That night the arc bent sharply in full view. Trump's empire of noise, his dynasty of entitlement, was forced into the light, and the contrast was undeniable. One man shouting, the other man steady. One clinging to power through fear, the other wielding power through truth. This was bigger than politics. It was a reminder of what America chooses to remember. Not the tantrums, not the insults, not the arrogance, but the moments of grace under fire. No one recalls the number of times someone shouted down an opponent. They remember the times dignity stood its ground. And so, the lesson crystallized. America doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the voice that carries truth, no matter how softly it's spoken. Doesn't belong to dynasties that demand loyalty. It belongs to people who earn trust through service. That's why those 42 seconds mattered. They weren't just a viral clip. They were a declaration that justice must always triumph over ego. The truth will always outlive arrogance, and in the end, as the echoes of that night settled into memory, one line became clear. In the end, America doesn't remember who shouted the loudest. It remembers who stood with dignity. 42 seconds. That's all it took for the contrast to become undeniable. Obama's steady calm against Trump's eruption, dignity against arrogance. In less than a minute, the world saw the difference between service and entitlement, between truth and bluster. It wasn't just a clash on live television. It was a portrait of two Americas, one built on noise and one built on values that endure. What makes this moment unforgettable isn't just the revelation or the eruption that followed. It's the lesson it carries forward. That strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from standing unshaken when the noise rises around you. Obama proved that night that dignity is not passive. It's powerful, and it can unravel arrogance in seconds. So here's where you come in. If you believe truth must always triumph over bluster, share this video. Let your friends, your family, your community see the moment where dignity exposed arrogance for what it was. And if you're with us in keeping these stories alive, stories where justice stands taller than ego, make sure you subscribe. Together we build a community that refuses to forget what matters, because history is watching, and history doesn't remember who shouted over the moderator, who waved their hands the highest, or who demanded loyalty at all costs. History remembers the leaders who stood with composure, with clarity, with truth. And that's why this 42-second moment will live on, not as a meltdown, not as a meme, but as proof. Because in the end, no smirk, no boast, no empire of lies can withstand the power of truth.